Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing absolutely fine and your preparation is going right on track. To aid you in your preparation even further, we are back here with a live analysis of the Hindu newspaper for today to discuss the most important news stories from both the mains and the prelims examination point of view. These are the articles that we have taken up for today's discussion. From the editorial point of view, we have taken up an article first about the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. How can it be resolved? What is India's position? What is the position of the Arab world? And also, what is the Western world doing here? Second is a topic that many of us unfortunately have forgotten already. The second topic is about the death toll due to COVID-19 in India. The article is about how India, the government of India that is, should try and get to the bottom of the exact number of people who lost their life in COVID-19 crisis and how can we ascertain that. Third article is about U.S China ties that after a long time seem to be going in a slightly positive direction. There have been a series of visits from China to the US and vice versa as well, and it may culminate into a presidential level summit between the US and China very soon. Then we'll be discussing about how railways can improve its transportation of cargo. If you remember, yesterday also there was an article on the health of the Indian Railways, how the Indian Railways is not earning enough money from the passenger business. This article today is about the transportation business of the railways, how it can earn more money through the transportation of goods and what needs to be done to improve the health of the railways. Fourth article is about urban floods in India. There is a report from the World Bank that has come out telling what are the reasons behind urban floods, what is it that we have to look into for the future and where does India stand. Then from the prelims exam point of view, a couple of news stories. First, a new mushroom variety has been discovered in the Western Ghats. And then there's an interesting article on the act of photocopying. How does photocopying work? That is xerography as you call it, the process behind it, and also a couple of very interesting cases regarding photocopy and the rights of people to use photocopy. So let's begin without any further delay with the very first article, that is about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, in the past 15-20 days, you would have seen a series of articles written on Israel-Palestine conflict, and a series of those articles have been discussed here as well. Now, if I tell you that this article has something new to offer, I would be lying. It doesn't have a lot of new things to offer, but it does give you a few interesting facts that you would be happy to know or you would be glad to know for your examination point of view. See, look at the author who has written this article, and I tell this to you every single time. Whenever you read an editorial, first read a line about the author, who is the author, and then you can understand from which point of view the article has been written. So in this case, the author is Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy. Who is he? He was the ambassador or the permanent representative of India to the UN, and he was the first representative to the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. Means he was the first Indian representative to represent India in Gaza. In fact, he lived there for a couple of years. So it's very obvious that the article that he has written is from the point of view of the people, the civilians mainly, who are living in Gaza, from the point of view of the Palestinian civilians, of what they are going through and what should have been done and what should be done in the future to ensure that they don't have the kind of suffering that they are facing right now. So this article is written from the point of view of number one, how the Palestinian and the civilian population mainly is not getting their due. Secondly, the fault of the Western countries in not resolving this issue. Thirdly, the fault of the Arab world in again being much closer to Israel now as compared to Palestine, and also a bit of, I would say, criticism of India as well about where does India's position stand. So he starts by saying that there is no excuse for what happened on October 7th. That is the attack carried out by Hamas. There is absolutely no excuse for that. That is a pure act of evil, a pure act of terrorism. But is it justified that because of this, do you now go and start killing thousands of civilians? That is a moral question that he's asking. He's saying that out of the thousands of people who have been killed, most of them, almost all of them have been civilians. There is no proper way to identify who amongst these were civilians and whom amongst these were Hamas militants. A lot of children also have been killed, and there has not been any reaction from the Western world, especially if you compare it with the tragedy, for example, what's happening in Ukraine. For example, if you just compare this, about 9,600 casualties, so about 9,600 people have died in Ukraine in about 20 months. And we have seen so many people talking about Ukraine. We have seen the Western countries putting sanctions on Russia. We have seen the Western countries doing everything they can to stop this conflict. As compared to that, he says that we have 8,000 plus Palestinian civilians who have been killed in just 22 days. And even then, we do not see the Western countries supporting a ceasefire. As we discussed yesterday also, in the UN General Assembly, the ceasefire resolution that was introduced was rejected by most of the Western countries, US, its European allies, also allies of Israel. So the author here is talking about the double standards that the Palestinians are facing. The other part of the story is that if you look at how Israel has worked in the past few years, in fact, ever since its formation, there has always been a talk of a two-state resolution or a two-state solution. The idea of a two-state solution means that there have to be two countries formed on this land. One has to be Palestine and one has to be Israel. India's official position also has always been that we support the two-nation solution. Most countries around the world do follow and do give support to the two-nation theory. However, what has happened in Israel is, in the past few years, ever since Benjamin Netanyahu has become the prime minister, ever since there has been this right-leaning Orthodox government, they have rejected the idea of a two-nation theory. In fact, now they are supposedly saying that no, there is only one single country that deserves to be on this land and not two countries. That has also led to all these sorts of troubles, what we are seeing in the West Bank, what we are seeing here in Gaza and in Israel. Now, I'm sure all of you by now are very well aware of the geography of Israel and Palestine. For example, if this is, let's say, Israel, something like this, over here you will see the West Bank, over here, let's assume you will see the Gaza Strip. These are the two areas, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, that are together considered as Israel. Now, the war that Israel is now into is at Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is a place that is ruled officially by Hamas. Hamas has officially come to power in Gaza Strip. So, in other words, there is no reason, or there should be no reason for Israel to attack the West Bank, right? If the entire point of Israel is that we are attacking Palestine so that we can kill Hamas militants, then why is it that they have also attacked the West Bank in the past? This is what the author is saying, that there is no justification for attacking and killing people in the West Bank. How is it that that is justified? There have been hundreds of people who have been killed, hundreds of civilians who have been killed still in the West Bank area as well. For a longest time, we have all seen that the slogan in this part of the world is land for peace. The UN has also supported the solution, the land for peace. Means give Palestinians their land and there will be peace. And if you give them the land that they deserve, the land that was there would be peace. However, this does not seem to be the slogan that has been supported by the Israel government now. The Israel government now seems to be on a much more offensive. Although Israel also for a very long time had supported the two-nation theory, but now that does not seem to be the case. The Western countries such as the US, etc., who have a lot of say in what Israel does, even they have not asked Israel to stop their offensive and to stop this offense that they are committing on the civilians living in the Gaza Strip area. This is one side of the story, what the Western countries are doing and their double standards. Then the author shifts focus to what the Arab world is doing. Now, for the longest time period, the Arab world, countries such as, let's say, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, they have been expected to be the supporters of Palestine. They have been expected to be the countries that would fight for the cause of the Palestinians, that would fight against Israel. And they have done so in the past. Israel has fought multiple wars, and you would have read about all of them, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. Most of these wars were fought by the Arab world against Israel in the name of the Arab world supporting the Palestinian people. However, in the past few years, even that has changed. In the past few years, a number of Arab countries are now looking to normalize their relationship with Israel. For example, countries such as the UAE, then we even have Saudi Arabia. All these countries, Jordan, although not officially, but they have also been trying to ensure that they also normalize their relationship. All these countries are trying to normalize a relationship with Israel and choosing Israel over Palestine. Now, there are a couple of things that you need to understand. First, if the Arab world was always so concerned about the rights of the Palestinians, why did they not offer them a place or a shelter? Even when the Palestinians are facing the wrath of Israelis, even when the Palestinians are being faced with rockets and guns and artillery, most of them are not offered a refuge in the Arab countries. That also shows how the Arab countries have chosen Israel over Palestine now. The Israeli government has tried for a two-state solution, at least verbally, but now their one-state solution or their law or their logic that there will be one single country in this area and not two seems to find support amongst the Arab world as well. Look at these things from the Palestinians' point of view as per the author. The author says that Palestinians have been promised their land time and time again, and none of these promises have been fulfilled. So can you really blame them for being frustrated? Can you really blame them for seeing violence time and time again and not being given their country? For example, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It led to Israel-Egypt Camp David Accords in 1978. In these accords, there was a promise of Palestinian self-rule, but nothing happened. This led to a series of violence that you know as Intifada that came in 1987. Because of all this frustration of the people in Palestine, where they were not able to get what they were promised, where they were not able to get their own land, this led to the formation of this group, that is Hamas, that officially came to power a few years back. Thus, even the roots of how and why Hamas as a group was formed lies in the failure of the Western countries in not being able to fulfill their promise. That is the point that the author is making. That if the Western countries would have fulfilled their promise, we may not even have a situation where a group such as Hamas would have come into existence. It led to the Oslo Accords of 1993 and 95. Again, similar promises of self-rule were given to Palestinian Authority, but none of these promises were ever fulfilled. In fact, over here, the article here says, as per the author, that the origin story of Hamas, how Hamas came into picture, even that has to be with the support of Israel. Try and understand a bit of history of Palestine. So Palestine or Palestinian government basically was called as a PLA or still called as a PLA, Palestine Liberation Authority. Most of the people or the power of PLA was always in the West Bank area. In the West Bank area, the main party that used to fight election, that used to come to power was Fatah. Fatah was a main political party in the West Bank area that used to come to power. They are more moderate. Fatah as a political party has accepted that Israel also has a right to exist. They have accepted that we would like to have dialogue with Israel to find a solution. But because their solutions were never implemented, because they were never able to force the Western countries to fulfill their promises, this is what led to the formation of Hamas, where Hamas came up as a group promising the people that if you bring us to power and throw out Fatah, we will fight against Israel and we will give you what you deserve. It is said that initially, the origin story of Hamas is that Israel did support the formation of Hamas because Israel wanted to weaken the PLA, wanted to weaken Fatah. So it's a joint collaboration of the Western world ignoring the demands and the promises they made, Israel also wanting to cut down the powers of the PLA, that led to the origin of Hamas. And now Hamas is coming back to attack Israel. I'll give you a similar example, although it's not the same, but take a very example which is very parallel to this. The origin story of Taliban. If you remember, the origin story of Taliban goes back to the era of 1970s when the Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, they invaded Afghanistan. Because Americans wanted to weaken the Soviet Union, they were the ones who gave rise to this force called Taliban. Taliban were trained by the Americans, Taliban were giving weapons, money by the Americans to fight against the Soviet Union. And then the same Taliban became a problem for America. Something similar is what is being written here by the author. That Hamas, the formation of Hamas was supported by the Israelis because they wanted to weaken Fateh, they wanted to weaken the PLA. And now the same Hamas is becoming a problem, is becoming a very, very big issue for the Israelis. Here we stand. Now what about India? We have talked about the Western countries, their double standards. We have talked about the Arab world, looking more towards Israel as a friend to get investment, to get trade from there. What about India? Now India, as you know, recently abstained from voting in the UN General Assembly on a resolution that asked for a ceasefire. That means that India seems to be in support of Israel right now, and you see these statements coming in from the government as well. Although the government is trying to walk that fine middle line where we are talking to Palestine also. But remember, when you read in the papers that Indian government is talking to Palestine, it means we are talking to the authority in the West Bank. We don't talk to authorities in Gaza. We talk to authorities in the West Bank. So what has India's history been? If you look at this, it's pretty interesting. Till 1992, till Jan 1992, India had no diplomatic relationship with Israel. India did not establish diplomatic relationship with Israel. In fact, I'll tell you a very interesting fact. In 1948, Israel came into being and it was trying to become a part of the UN. When Israel was trying to become a part of the UN, there was a resolution on Israel, whether it should be allowed to become a part or not. All the Arab countries, all the Arab nations obviously voted against Israel. They voted against Israel, that Israel should not be allowed to be a part of the UN. Apart from the Arab countries, do you know, there was only one single country that voted against Israel, that Israel should not be a part of UN. Which one country was that? India. India was the only non-Arab country to vote against Israel being admitted to the UN. That was our stand in the beginning, that we were so much in favor of Palestine and so much against Israel. In fact, there have been instances in 1970s where India hosted certain international events, sporting events, and we did not even give visa to athletes coming in from Israel. This has been India's stand for the longest time. But it all changed under P.V. Narasimha Rao when he became the Prime Minister. And he thought it is time that India accept and establish diplomatic relationship with Israel, which we did starting 1992. Although India still maintains that we support the two-nation solution, but now if you see where India stands, we are much more in favor of Israel and we do not really condemn most of the act that Israel does. In fact, we have been trying to assimilate with Israel and the Arab world as much as possible. We have seen how India has been so excited about the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. We have seen how India is happy about the I2, U2 group, that is India, Israel, US and the UAE, which again proves the fact that most of the countries in the world, including India, may officially still say that we are in favor of the two-nation solution, but in reality there is a very, very significant tilt in favor of Israel. Now, if you see with Israel, there is a very strong relationship that India has built over the years. The interesting part is, even before we had established full diplomatic relationship with Israel in 1992, do you know Israel has always been in support of establishing good relationship with India? In multiple wars, even before this 1962 China war, Israel did offer to help us in whatever way possible. Israel has always been one of those countries that has spent a lot of money in its research, means that they have a lot of technology which other countries do not have. technology of desalination, technology of agriculture, even in the area that is mostly desert, which has attracted India towards Israel, leading to a lot of significant deals, including defense deal that exist even today. In the year 2000, Lal Krishna Advani became the first Indian minister to visit Israel because the diplomatic relationship was only established in 1992. 2003, we had a visit of Israeli Prime Minister to India as well. Between the two sides, the bilateral trade is right now about $6.35 billion, excluding defense. So with Israel, we do buy a lot of defense, radar, missiles, etc. are some of the things that we buy from Israel very, very significantly. Apart from this, our forces also use the Falcon 8 WACS, that is the Airborne Warning and Control System. We also have the Barak anti-missile defense system, because missiles and radar system from Israel have been considered to be one of the best in the entire world. There's also a lot of collaboration in the field of agriculture, because again, the area where Israel came into being was literally a desert where they have been able to set up sustainable agriculture. So all those techniques are also something which India has been interested in. We have taken help from their expertise, technologies in horticulture, orchards, and also the canopy management methods as well. In the field of energy as well, Tamar and Leviathan gas fields, which are off the coast of Israel, have recently been explored by India, and India has even made a bid to extract natural gas from these fields and import that and export that to the other part of the country as well. This has been done by ONGC Videsh Limited. Again, India's interest in Israel right now far supersede the interest that we have or may have had in Palestine. The reason being, when India did not establish a relationship with Israel, one of the primary reasons was that we wanted to show to the Arab world that we also support the cause of Palestine, because Arab world has always been very significant for India from the point of view of energy supply, from the point of view of Indian diaspora working there. But now that the Arab world itself is opening up and being friends with Israel, India sees no reason to stay away from Israel and come much closer to it. Then the second article. Second article is about a topic that unfortunately many of us have forgotten, thankfully, that is the COVID-19 crisis. The article is about how we still do not have an exact data that we know of the death toll of COVID-19 crisis. Now, why is this article written? Let me first give you the background of it. So the article is written in the context of what you call as CRS. CRS is Civil Registration System. Civil Registration System is published by the Registrar General of India. It is the official data from the side of the government about the number of births, death, etc. This data is supposed to come out now in just a few weeks. The data that will come out now will be the CRS of year 2021. So it usually works about 2 years later. So if it is being released in 2023, it will be the data of 2021. If it's released next year, it will be data of 2022. So the CRS data of 2021, that is from 2020 to 21, this data is expected to be released very soon. This is why this article has been written. That since now we have just a few days remaining in the publishing of the CRS, that is the Civil Registration System Report of 2021, it is time that the Registrar General of India and the government adopts a proper, robust method to give clear numbers and clear data so that we can be much better prepared in the future. See, there are a couple of things that we have to understand. Many governments would want to suppress the data, would want to tell the world that, see, no, not many people died in our country. We were much better prepared to give a better image of ourselves. But on the other hand, if you reduce the number of people artificially who have passed away, if you suppress the data, that means that you are not giving your own system a full opportunity, full information to get better prepared for the future. For example, let's say there is a very bad disease that is spreading outside if anyone leaves their house. Now, do you have two choices at the government? One choice that you have as the government is, don't tell your people that anyone is dying, so that the people are very happy. But if the people don't know, they will obviously go outside and they will be infected. So do you not tell the people so that they have a better image in your mind? Or do you tell the people so that they are better prepared? That is always a dichotomy that the governments across the world have. Would you suppress the data to present a good image, or would you tell the real story to be better prepared? This is what the authors here are saying, that internationally, the health community is urging governments across the world to show real data, how many people have died, how many people have been infected, so that we can be much better prepared for such kind of things in the future. In India, we always have certain gaps in these kind of data collections. For example, the author here is saying that in India, the COVID-19 death registration might not be correct because overall death registration in India is only about 70%. You would have seen so many times that there are people who have died whose names are still in the voter list. How is that possible? The reason is, if a person's name is in the voter list and you have not told the authority that the person has passed away, if you have not registered the person's death, obviously the name will still remain there. It will not go away automatically. This is where the problem is. That on an average, as per the authors, 70% of deaths are registered in India, while other 30% are not registered. It also varies from state to state. In some states and districts, the data is much more accurate than the others. Also, our death registration data did not give weekly or does not give weekly or monthly data. So we don't even know if we want to compare in how many people died in this month, how many people died in this week. So it will be a very difficult task to look at how the progression of COVID-19 has affected the population. The authors here are pinning all their hopes on the government civil registration system that will now be released in the coming days. They expect that this system would actually tell us in a much more detailed manner how many people have passed away. The death estimate that has been done by multiple studies, not government studies. Multiple studies have said that death estimate in India for COVID was about 47 lakh. Close to 47 lakh, but again the government has not accepted this, because accepting that 47 lakh people died would be government accepting its failure at so many levels. So the government has not accepted this data so far, although many government or many studies apart from the government do indicate that close to this number of deaths occurred in India due to COVID-19 crisis. Does the same number get reflected in the CRS? We have to see this. Now, the authors are suggesting that for the CRS report for 2021, the government of India must have a task force of national experts to make sure that this data compilation is up to the date, that all the relevant sources have been given to compile this data. Going forward, the author suggests that we must gather data district-wise as well to ensure that if there are certain districts that are much more affected by a certain disease or a certain factor, the planning can be done accordingly. There is no point of just having data at an all India level. If at an all India level you get to know that 10 lakh people have died, but the reality is only from 2 districts 2 lakh people died, then the problem is in those 2 districts mainly. So unless you have this proper district-wise data about health, mortality, etc., you will not be able to have proper policies going forward. Now the CRS that is at the center of this article is the civil registration system. It is published by the Registrar General of India. Now this is a system which talks about permanent compulsory universal recording of events such as death, birth, stillbirth, etc. It is mandated to be done or published by the Registrar General of India under the Registration of Births and Death Act of 1969. This is published by Registrar General that works under the Ministry of Home Affairs. The Home Affairs Ministry has been talking about revamping the entire system to make it much more machine-based, to reduce the manual intervention, to make it real-time update, so that at any point of time the government can get to know the real data without waiting for the report to be published after a couple of years. So these are some of the changes that the government is planning to introduce in the CRS. Now, this is a snapshot of the data that was released in the last year's report. Please remember the last year's report, that was CRS 2020. This report basically gave all these data pointers. When the current version comes in, we might see some changes in these numbers, but this also the kind of data, that is the gender ratio, etc., that comes into CRS. Moving on to the third article for the day. The third article is about the relationship between two superpowers right now, US and China. It's right to see that in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 decades, the relationship between the two sides, US and China, has not been that great. There have been times when the relationship becomes very bad, but usually we do see at least the two sides being on talking terms. But in the past few years, especially ever since Donald Trump came to power, the relationship between the two sides actually started to deteriorate considerably. When Donald Trump came to power, he made a lot of statements against China about how China misuses its economic prowess, how China gives subsidies, how China has not been giving the same kind of national treatment to American products. He imposed a lot of additional taxes on the Chinese products as well. When Joe Biden came to power, although he did not make those kind of statements, but he did not take back all the taxes that Donald Trump had imposed. Although he criticized Donald Trump for doing that, but he continued with most of the taxes Donald Trump had imposed. Also, this problem of spy balloon. I'm sure all of you remember this. A few months back, there was the news that there were many mysterious balloons flying over the US, which were considered to be spy balloons spying on the US. It was mainly spying or floating on those areas where US is set to keep its nuclear installations. It was supposedly of Chinese origin. The US shot down those balloons. That led to almost the entire breakdown of relationship between the two sides at a diplomatic level. Then the problem of Taiwan always remains at the center of the two sides. China considers Taiwan as an integral part, which they will make a part of the mainland sometime. US supports Taiwan. US says that no, Taiwan has a right to have a independent country altogether. These are some of the issues that still remain between US and China. But the fact is, despite all their differences, they have never ever tried to disrupt their trade, because both the countries are dependent on each other so much that the trade between the two sides, if it is disrupted, it will harm both the sides. So the trade has continued. The one other thing that has happened in the past few months, from the side of America especially, there has been an attempt to reach out to China multiple times, because China's cloud, China's power has been increasing all around the world. So you cannot ignore the rise of China. There have been multiple high-level meetings, high-level officials from US going into China. It is expected now that in the upcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit that will be held in San Francisco, we might have the two presidents meeting for the summit-level talks. Although it is still not confirmed, but it may happen in the future. Now, why is it so important? The reason being that if you see around the world, there are multiple wars that are happening right now. The Ukraine-Russia war, then the Israel-Palestine war. And China actually can play a very, very important role in mediating in many of these cases. China obviously has a special relationship with Russia. Apart from this, China also has a special relationship with many of the West Asia, that is Middle Eastern countries. Iran and China, for example, are very close to each other in the past few years. China had signed a $400 billion deal with Iran that we'll buy oil from you and in return we will invest in your country, we'll give you weapons, etc. So Iran also is under the influence of China right now. So the connection here is China has influence over Iran. Iran, as you know, supports Hezbollah. In fact, Hezbollah is almost running entirely with the help of Iran. They are the ones who are saying that we will support Hamas, and then Hamas is attacking Israel. So this is a big chain where China can actually play a big role. In fact, China has been increasing its influence so much that they were able to have a deal signed between Saudi Arabia and Iran as well. The two countries that don't even see eye to eye. That is why the US realizes that in order to put an end to these conflicts, in order to make sure that Hezbollah does not open up another front against Israel, China's role will be extremely essential. And this is why the US is reaching out to China in every single way possible. The last time that the two leaders met was at Bali, that is the last G20 summit that was held in Indonesia. They discussed about Taiwan, other things as well, but their relationship has not really improved since then, mainly because of the spy balloon incident that we saw. The US, on the other hand, has also been imposing a lot of restrictions on trade with China. For example, the two countries right now are locked up in a kind of a race in AI and in the chip industry. The two sides realize that whichever country has the advantage in the field of AI and semiconductor chips would be the superior power going forward. That is why America has put a lot of restrictions on the companies that high-tech technology should not be exported to China. They have said that sophisticated chips should not be exported to China. China has to make its own. China also is worried about how their economy seems to be slowing considerably. They have seen multiple issues in their real estate. Mainly we see photos and videos of thousands and lakhs of houses just being empty in China. There have been some collapse of big companies in China, which seems that Chinese economy is slightly stumbling. US also upgraded its ties in the region with multiple countries. The US President Joe Biden from G20 summit in India straight away flew to Vietnam. That also indicates how important relationship with Vietnam is for the US. They have renewed the relationship with India, Australia, even Philippines, etc. That means that even America is ensuring that in this region around China, they have a lot of ears which they can listen to and they can then take action. This is where the two sides right now are situated or are in this middle of a kind of a negotiation where China does not want to give away a lot of powers, but China also realizes that to go to the next level, they also need help from the Americans. They also need help from American technology export. They also need help from the American market as well. Thus, the upcoming summit, if it does happen, would be a good direction, not just for these two countries, but for the entire world. Because right now, the only country that can try to talk to Russia to ensure that Russia maybe has a ceasefire with Ukraine is China. China is the only country that has so much leverage over Russia. Similarly, China seems to be the only country that has so much leverage over Iran that it can actually talk to Iran and tell Iran that you should not escalate these wars. So again, whether China comes around, listens to the US, it remains to be seen. What about China? What have they been doing? See, China is a unique country in itself. You can't compare China with any other country or how the other democracies work. China follows something called the wolf warrior diplomacy. Wolf warrior diplomacy means even if you blame China for something, that you attacked us or you did something wrong, they will never say that no, we did not do that. They will become even more aggressive that yes, we did that, so what? Even if you, let's say to China that you broke this rule, they will not say, oh sorry, I did not do this, it was a mistake. No, their first reaction would be, so what? I am China, I can do whatever I want. That's the wolf warrior diplomacy that China usually employs. China also wants that the Western world should recognize that the Chinese system is also a democratic system. Western world usually does not recognize China as a democratic country because China allows only one single political party, the Communist Party of China, that controls everything, including the judiciary as well. The Western countries obviously do not suppose this ideology, but China wants that their claim on Taiwan, that their claim that this is a legit system, they want the Western countries to support this as well. The U.S. China relationship right now seems to be a hope for the entire world that if this becomes better, it may lead to resolution of multiple disputes going forward. This is what we have seen in the past few months. You see this article from May of this year, which again shows how US, rather than now coming face to face with the Chinese, are trying to resolve their differences with the Chinese, realizing the fact that they have to be together if the world has to resolve all these disputes, and they have to be together because economically they are both dependent on each other, and one single country cannot outrun the other without the help of the other one. This is an example of how China diplomatically has improved its presence. As I said earlier as well, China has been able to maintain very close relationship with multiple countries in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia being the most prominent ones. The two countries that did not see eye to eye with each other came on the same table, signed an agreement that was negotiated by China a few months back. China has been acting as a big peacemaker in West Asia, and their role in how the power dynamics evolves is extremely, extremely important. They have the ability to influence Iran, a country that does not really listen to the US. They even have the capacity to influence Russia. Russia has been extremely dependent on China now ever since they have been sanctioned by the Western countries. They earn most of their money from China. They sell most of their gas to China. China is the one that is also taking advantage of their cheaper oil and gas. So again, China right now is in a very unique position. From a position of strength, they can play as the role of the peacemaker only if they want to. If they don't want to, then the world will become an even interesting place to look forward. The next article that we have is about the railways. Interestingly, we are discussing second article of the railways in consecutive days. The last article that we discussed yesterday was about the finances of the railways, how railways subsidizes its passenger business, makes a lot of losses, and tries to compensate that from the freight business. Here, the article is about the transportation of cargo only, how there needs to be an improvement in the railways infrastructure to give a boost to our industries. How a lot of industries mainly depend on the railways for transportation of their goods. What are the problems that we see? What is the lack of infrastructure which railways has been suffering from? Now, of all the modes of transportation, road, water, rail within the country, rail is the most effective one. Internationally, obviously, it is water, but within the country, the cheapest mode of transportation and the most effective one seems to be the railways. Now, which is why most of the companies, most of the mineral companies mainly, they use railways for their logistic needs, which brings to light the question of whether railways has enough infrastructure or not. The government, realizing that, has focused on two big flagship schemes. One, the PM Gati Shakti policy, and second, the National Master Plan, along with the National Logistic Policy. The PM Gati Shakti, as you know, it tries to create a sustainable infrastructure, that is multimodal transport network, to make sure that across the entire country there is seamless transition from rail to road to water whenever required. The National Logistic Policy focuses on building up logistic portal to integrate various ministries so that taking permissions, taking all these grants, licenses, etc. becomes much easier. All these are capital expenditures from the side of the government of India to make sure that infrastructure becomes much better, much more robust, and it becomes cheaper to transport goods from one place to the other. I'll give you an example. If you look at the history of some of the most developed countries in the world, I'll give you two examples. Look at Germany. Germany is one of the most sophisticated, most robust economies of Europe. The entire system of modern highways, the highways that you see today, modern highways were first invented in Germany only. It was a time of the Second World War where Germans thought that we need systems where we can transport our goods, our weapons at a much faster pace. That is when they came up with these ideas of highways and connecting highways, etc. That got copied in a much better way in the US. So after Second World War, we had the US President Eisenhower. He was considered as the person behind modernizing the US highway system. So the US speed road or speedways, or the highways as you call them, were again the backbone of how the US economy will grow. So investing in highways, investing in these heavy infrastructure is obviously very capital intensive at that time, but it always gives you a very good return in the long run because it gives a boost to the industry. Similar is what is happening here. We are trying to introduce private freight terminals, means private companies can take up freight terminals, can have their own freight wagons. They can operate these so that they can make the wagons in a way that they want, which makes it easier for them to transport their stuff. Also, the government of India right now has allowed over 16,000 privately owned wagons so that they can easily transport their stuff from one place to the other place, such as automobiles, such as fly ash, etc. Because again, transporting automobiles is not easy. You have to build special wagons. For example, you have seen those huge trucks that carry 15-20 new cars. They are specially built so that these cars can be accommodated in a proper manner. Similarly, the railway wagons have to be built in such a way. Now, we also have a concept of railway siding. What is siding? Let me first show you. So this is siding. You have this railway track and then basically you have a diversion. Another track here, this is called siding. So that the goods, train, etc. can remain stationary here. So this is the main track, this will be the siding track, so that you have a goods train that is stationary there. You can easily load stuff because see, if you have only one platform, for example, let's say there is the only line that you have. If there's a goods train standing here, you will obviously take a lot of time to load the stuff, then unload it. In those hours when the stuff is being loaded, unloaded, what will be the train doing behind it? It will just be standing there. So in order to save time, make it more effective, you have a siding. You have a parallel kind of a track. Now the problem is railway siding is also very high cost thing. It's capital intensive. Only large companies, large industries have been able to do that from their own money. Other smaller industries which do not have this advantage, when they have to load the stuff, they have to go a long distance by road just to come to a railway track or just to come to a railway station where there is siding facility so that they can load their stuff. That also is a big problem. Only the big industries have been able to prepare their own siding network so that they can load their stuff. The smaller industries still don't have that advantage. For example, 33 plants right now, which contribute to about 6.5% of the annual share, they are the ones that mostly look into they are the ones that mostly dominate how much railway cargo will they use. When the smaller facilities or when the smaller industries are not able to invest so much money in building a railway siding network, it becomes a government's responsibility to help them out. Other part of the story here is the relationship between the railways and the state governments. So railways comes under the central government. The central government decides which infrastructure to be built in which area. Even if a state government demands building a certain railway infrastructure, the central government takes the final call. This also should be made better. The state governments also should be allowed to influence the decision making of the railways. The state governments also should have a say in how industrial clusters are made, how cities which have a lot of mineral mines, they require all this infrastructure, and these minerals, mines, etc. should be allowed to have much better connectivity with the Indian railway network. The other side of the story is, are there any negative impacts on the environment? Now, the Indian Railways is used also for transportation of fly ash. Now, the problem with the fly ash is it's obviously very dangerous for the environment if left loose. The government has asked for 100% of the fly ash that is produced to be used in some activity, making of bricks, etc. In 2021, the fly ash produced was 232 million tons. About 214 million tons was actually used. Now, these fly ash also can be used in a lot of other infrastructure facilities by the railways also. Railways also has to play a very, very important role in ensuring that their proper transportation becomes better. Fly ash is something that you cannot transport very easily without having a proper cargo, because if it is released into the environment, it becomes very, very problematic. It can enter your lungs. It can have a proper obstruction in your windpipe. This is where the role of the railways is important still, where the railways has to make sure that these fly ash are transported well, number one, and secondly, they can also be used in the infrastructure that the railways itself is building. The good part is railways is on track to achieve the government's target of being a net zero carbon emitter by 2030. Indian Railways is one of the largest networks in the entire world. So to make it net zero is a big, big deal. The government announced that we'll be making Indian Railways net zero emitter in 2021. They announced this, that the goal is to do this by 2030. We are still on track. The government has not announced that we are off track or not. So we are hoping that we are still on track to achieve this target as well. The next article is about the problem of urban floods that we see far too often in India. Big cities in India, the metro cities, be it Delhi, Gurgaon, Bangalore, Mumbai, Chennai, you name it, all these places, for all their great infrastructure, for all the big developments that have been done, even then almost all of them still have an issue of urban flood. There's a rain of just about a few hours and you see the entire city floating, you see water being stagnated. Why is that the case? Where do we lack? What is the infrastructure that is required? There are a couple of reports mentioned here. As per the article, the State Bank of India published a report estimating that the economic loss for the 2023 North India floods and Cyclone Biparjoy in Gujarat was about 10 to 15,000 crores. Now, the World Bank has also given a report recently where they have said that the urban flood problem is not just a problem with India. There are multiple nations around the world where, with the increase in population the last 4 decades, with a lot of pressure on accommodating a lot of people, construction activities have gone on without giving any due priority to what the environment says, without giving priority to preserving the natural water bodies. We have been making or developing all these infrastructure without even looking into the feasibility of it. That has led to all these problems. In fact, the World Bank says that there are countries such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, Myanmar that are amongst the 20 most exposed countries to flood hazards. India is not amongst the worst 20, but again, with the high population that India has and the population pressure, some of our cities are really under danger. Most of these cities which are very susceptible to urban floods are in East Asia and are in sub-Saharan Africa along with North America having the advantage of being the least exposed to flood. There is a simple example, there is a simple way to understand this. The more money that you have, the better infrastructure that you can make, it will make you much, much lesser susceptible to floods. Because regions such as Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia do not have the kind of technology, do not have the kind of money to spend in these kind of infrastructure. This is where they are lagging. There are countries such as China, U.S, all these countries are some of the largest contributors to these problems of making emissions much higher, much more concentrated, because of which you will see there is increase in the sea level. Countries which are small island nations have been extremely prone to all these problems, especially when they don't have enough land area to transfer their people or to migrate their people. A few years back, let me remind you, a few years back in Maldives, the Maldives president had a cabinet meeting underwater. They were wearing all these scuba suits underwater. They wanted to show to the world that after a few years, this is how we will have our own cabinet meeting. And this is something that is becoming a reality even in our urban cities as well. Urbanization at a pace where we are not giving due importance to our environment has been the major reason behind economic loss, behind the loss of life as well, as we see around the world, including in India. You do not see a lot of places where there are open grounds where water can be absorbed, When there are rains, it falls on the concrete cannot absorb the water, and the water just becomes stagnated. And it's a problem in most of the low income countries. Even amongst the low income countries, obviously the people who cannot afford to have technology which protects them, these are the people who have always faced most of the brunt of urban flooding. What do you do? How do you protect yourself against urban flooding? Make sure that there is enough free area, there is enough concrete free area. Make sure that you are preserving your water bodies. Take an example, and you can see it in your own local city, whichever city that you are living in. Ask your parents how many lakes or ponds used to exist in your city earlier, 20 years back, and now see how many lakes or ponds exist in your city now. A lot of lakes or ponds in your city would have just been over. There may have been construction over it, there may have been some building built, there may have been water taken out, there may have been something else built. All of that means that there's just not enough water, there is just not enough space for the water to go beneath, and that is why we have urban flooding. Please understand, urban flooding is a very commonly asked question by the UPSC. Every 2 to 3 years in the mains examination, you will have some question on urban flooding, the factors behind urban flooding, how some of it is natural, how some of it is not natural, it is man-made. I'll give you an example of natural also. So some of the urban floods that we see around the country are natural. For example, every single year you see news stories of floods in Assam. Now, it's very, very unfortunate. Many people lose their lives, many animals lose their life in urban floods in Assam. One of the reasons why it occurs every single year is the topography of Assam. For example, Assam is mostly a valley. So, for example, if there are mountains on this side, mountains on this side, and it's a valley in between, when there is a rainfall, a high rainfall, obviously the water will flow into this direction, and there's not much that you can do in that case. So natural topography also plays a role in some cases, such as Assam, when we see frequent flooding year after year. But a lot of it also has to do with the man-made factors of what we have done, how we have lived, how we have exposed all our water bodies, how we have given much more importance to building infrastructure rather than conserving the environment. These are called stormwater drains. This is considered as an extremely important component of urban infrastructure. Whenever you see any plain area, even when you go out, let's say walk in the open, you will see there's a slight slope. If you see this flow, there's a slight slope here. So that when the water falls, these are called storm water drains, where the water actually can go in. There has to be a place for water to go in. If it's just plain concrete, the water will get accumulated here. It does not have anywhere else to go. So having storm water drains, making sure it is not clogged, making sure that the municipality works to clear this up very frequently, this is a way forward to correct the problem of urban flooding. Now, from the prelims point of view, we have a couple of news stories. First, a fact-based news. The researchers have identified a new mushroom species in the Western Ghats. Now, it's a difficult name to remember and pronounce, so let's try this. So, the new species that has been found is named as Candoliomyces alboscucumus. So, if you can remember, great. If you can't remember, at least try and find out some trick. This is the new species that has been found out by the researchers at Jawaharlal Nehru Tropical Botanic Garden and Research Institute. This is a kind of a mushroom, and mushroom, as you know, is a kind of a fungi. It's about 58 millimeters in height. It has a cap at the top. Basically, this is the shape. You might say this looks like just like any other mushroom. To me and to you, it does, but for the researchers, it obviously has a unique name which they have given. It has a cap at the top. It is about 12 millimeter to 38.5 millimeter in diameter. That is this cap shaped thing that they're talking about. Now, as I said, mushroom is a type of fungi. Do remember a few facts about this. Fungi can be single-celled or it can be multicellular as well. And they are found in most habitats across the entire world. They live mostly on land, mainly in soil rather than on sea, etc. This fungi group are considered as the decomposers. They grow in soil, dead plant. Wherever they are, they can play an important role in the cycling of carbon and other elements. That is why they are considered as extremely important in cleaning of the environment in certain cases. Do remember their importance. Also, some of the parasites of plants which cause disease, etc., are also found here. The last news for the day, again a fact-based article on the concept of photocopying that we call in day-to-day life. Official term is xerography. So there's an article written on how xerography works, how the copying of chemical or how the copying of one paper over the other paper works, what is the process. Now from the examination point of view, I would not say that understanding or remembering the entire process is important. You can obviously read through it. There are some basic elements that are involved. First, you need to have a photoconductive surface. Now, for example, let's say when you have this photocopy machine, think of it as a photocopy machine, the surface on which you put the paper, that is a photoconductive surface. It is coated with a photoconductive material. What does that material do? When it exposes the light, it allows electrons to flow through it. So whenever there is dark colored ink, from that ink, the electrons will not flow through because that's dark. From the other side, the electrons will flow through. How do the electrons flow through? Because of the charges. So the surface is negatively charged. How is the surface negatively charged? If you see within the photocopy machine, what happens? There's actually very high voltage wire that makes this particular surface negatively charged. The sheet of paper is illuminated with that bright light. Wherever there are these dark inks, that area is left alone. The other area is where we see the flow of the electrons. This is how the process actually works. You place this here, negatively charged toner particles are attracted to the remaining positive areas. The paper is placed over the machine and the toner is transferred to this particular paper, and we have an exact replica of the paper which you put in the photocopy machine. Now, more importantly, rather than studying about the technique and how it works, I wanted to share with you an extremely important Supreme Court case. Not regarding photocopying technology, obviously, but a Supreme Court case with regards to the concept of copyright versus photography. Now, what exactly is this? Many of you, when you want to buy a book, let's assume you want to buy a book, let's say M. Lakshmikant's Indian Polity or any book that you want to buy. Now, let's assume you go and ask at the bookseller, do you have the book? And they say, we don't have the book. But what can we do is we can give you a photocopy version. We can photocopy the original book and we have that in the spiral form and you can take it. Many of you take it, it's usually cheaper. Now the problem is it correct or not? For example, when the author writes a book, let's say I have written a book, when anyone buys that original copy of the book, I get a commission from that. As the author, this is called a royalty. Let's say if you buy a book for 500 rupees, maybe let's say the author, let's assume, gets 50 rupees, for example. Now, obviously, if you're buying a photocopied version, the author is not getting anything out of it. So what is the use of the author giving so much time and knowledge to write that book? Isn't it unfair? This is where the problem starts. Now, in 2012, there was this important case that came up. The case was in Delhi University. There are certain books that are written or published by the Oxford University Press. These are very expensive books. They cost thousands of rupees. Few of them are available in the library, so only very few students can issue them. But if you have to buy, you have to spend thousands of rupees. Like many other colleges and universities, outside Delhi University also, there are many photocopying shops. These photocopying shops copy this and sell you a photocopied version, the spiral form. Obviously, it's much cheaper. It's about 50 paisa per page. So now this became a very important case. Can you photocopy someone's material? Are you not violating the person's copyright? Are you not violating the person's right to earn royalty? This became such a big case that it went to the Supreme Court. The case was about whether the Oxford University Press is right that their material cannot be photocopied and just sold, or do the students have the right to get cheap study material, affordable study material? In this case, and you would be happy to know, the case was decided in favor of the photocopier. In favor of the photocopier, that yes, you can publish this, you can photocopy this. Why? Because the students have the right to get affordable knowledge. If the students can't afford these expensive books, where will they go? They have the right to get their hands on these photocopies. Yes, a part of that profit should go to the Oxford University Press as well. A part of it, but you can still go ahead and photocopy. So today, if you're reading from any photocopied notes, do thank the Supreme Court and do thank the entire technology behind xerography or behind photocopy, so that it actually has allowed you to get your hands on all these material that you could not have gotten otherwise. We also have counterfeiting, which becomes a problem because of photocopying, but yes, that is just an offshoot of how a person chooses to use the technology. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. There are a couple of practice questions right here in front of you. One from urban flooding and the other about the rise of China and the role of China as a peacemaker possibly. Do try and write these answers on our student answer writing portal. Check each other's answers and give feedback to each other. I'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. with the next session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.